Hi, everyone. Hello, happy holidays. A little bit from a distance from the English embankment. So give me a second. Something has changed again here on Zoom. Every time, honestly, every time I join, every time I share the screen, something happens. So I hope you can see the screen. I may even just keep the chat open just in case. Let me just make sure that no one is forgotten in the waiting room. Oh, Cindy, hi. Hi, Catherine. Satyam, good to see you again. It's nice having you. So happy holidays, everyone. And let's get down to the draw just in case the chat is here. So what are we looking at? I know it's in Russian, but I honestly I haven't been able to figure out how to switch it to English, but I just I thought, okay, what is important here is that what you're looking at is the big body of water. This is the Neva River, and the bridge, the only bridge you can see across the river is actually the Palace Bridge. So, which means that the building to the right hand side from the bridge is actually the Winter Palace, so the Hermitage Museum. I know you don't have the pointer, so it doesn't make a lot of sense to actually use the pointer, but this green square shaped building is the Winter Palace. And the square next to it is is the Palace Square. Now you can see from the left side of the bridge on the shore, you can see a rectangular building, uh, almost rectangular. So that's the Admiralty, and in fact, this is one of the, I would say, absolutely fundamental buildings in the area, and that's the building that kind of shaped face of this so-called Golden Triangle of St. Petersburg because, well, this is the downtown for sure, since the Winter Palace is just over there, and the main industry of St. Petersburg and of the region would be shipbuilding. So having the big shipbuilding yard was absolutely fundamental. And since it was absolutely essential for this shipbuilding yard to be on the river. So all the buildings, a lot of facilities next to it would, I would say the next several streets next to the Admiralty would be all about shipbuilding. There would be living the shipbuilders. Well, I would say in the downtown would be mostly living those, I would say, not just ordinary shipbuilders, but some engineers, some specialists of different kinds, also politicians, obviously, a lot of merchants, yes, for sure. And also, this is the area. So oh yeah, so I did the right thing. Oh my goodness, that was very clever of me. Wow. Wow. And mind you, I did that last night at around 1 a.m. So after all my waffle kerfuffle thing, in case you missed that. So for the past 36 hours, well, I mean, yeah, uh, about, yeah, 36 hours, I made waffles for Grisha's school market. So it's over. We sold out. It's fine, but I'm still kind of not over it completely. Nevertheless. So what I did, I recorded the screen using the pointer. So what I'm pointing at, this was exactly the Winter Palace, right? The Hermitage Museum. This is where my hand is now. That's the Admiralty building. So the former shipbuilding yard. And then we are moving down. That's the bridge. This is actually the Annunciation Bridge and the street that the embankment that goes from the Admiralty to the Annunciation Bridge. It's the first half of the English embankment. That's what I'm showing. And that's where the pointer is. This is the second part of the English embankment. And from there, as you can see, there is a canal and the street turns around the corner. That's basically at that corner. That's where the embankment finishes. And today we're going to reach exactly that very corner. And in fact, that's an important thing to show. So I'm going to go back here again. So again, you see that corner of the English embankment. Um, the these are all separate islands, if you can see them, right? So if you look at the on the other side of the canal, you see a lot of kind of these buildings, very long ones. This is the island that entirely is entirely given to a new shipbuilding yard. This is one of the parts of the modern shipbuilding yard, modern admiralty. And also, if you look a little bit to the right, there is a triangular island. You can see that it's clear. It looks exactly like a triangle. This is the New Holland. So basically, the English embankment is kind of situated in this triangle from the old Admiralty building, which is now one of the headquarters of the fleet of the Navy. Then to the left-hand side, this one big island, it's all the modern Admiralty. And from below, that is this triangular shaped island. This is the New Holland Island, which was also partly the storage for the shipbuilding material. And partly it was I would say it was also a little shipbuilding yard, the big warehouse, and also the place where a lot of other works were held. And also there was a prison. So today we're kind of going to walk this uh, road along the embankment. We're going to see a little bit of the Admiralty because, well, I did show it multiple times back in the peaceful times when I was still in my town, when I was still in St. Petersburg, but I don't expect you to remember that. And we're going to cover the buildings we haven't talked about on the previous tours. And we're going to wrap it up with a short visit to the New Holland Island, which is going to be, I would say, quite a nice way to wrap up with this area of St. Petersburg, which for some reason I have never really taken you before. I mean, the walk on the English embankment, we have never done that. But this is not the end of my English story because there is also English Avenue. And there are a lot of stories about the English Avenue, such as the house where Matilda Kshestinska, Russian ballerina, kind of spent a lot of nights full of love and passion with the future Emperor Nicholas II. How do you like that story? Okay, so but that's kind of uh, I'm working on it now. So this is the building of the Admiralty, the first Admiralty across the street from the Hermitage, from the Winter Palace. That's what it looks from the inner yard. Through this archway, you can see that's where the inner yard is. So back in the days, there was not really a yard. I mean, what's the yard itself was actually the shipbuilding area. There was water. There were docks where the ships were built. And the store and the wood and all the construction material that was needed to build the ships would be brought from the New Holland Island. This is quite a recognizable spire of St. Petersburg, and this is in fact one of the main symbols of the Nevsky Avenue, the main avenue of the city. And from this spire of the Admiralty building, three main avenues would be starting, including the Nevsky, obviously. But we're not walking on the Nevsky. Actually, that's what I'm talking about. So you see that spire. If you look from the other side of it, like from the opposite side, so that's behind this wall and behind the Admiralty, the future St. Petersburg would be. But at the moment, this is just kind of wilderness. Here, what you see is the Neva River and that former non-existent courtyard, which was also the shipbuilding area. And then right now, obviously, the Admiralty is, well, the shipbuilding yard doesn't exist there. It was all moved to another island. So the one in the very end of the English embankment. That's what I'm talking about. And this is where all the shipbuilding process is actually is carried out. But there are also other shipbuilding areas further down on the Vasilievsky Island too. So this is kind of only part of it. Just some old photos of the Admiralty. Yeah, we walked there back in the days. We saw the fountains. So that's the Winter Palace. And now, thanks to Google Maps, I can take you all the way to the English Embankment. So this is one side of the Admiralty building. And this over there is already the Neva River. You can see what I'm talking about right now. So that's the Neva. And now, if you look at the courtyard, so you see there is a courtyard. So these buildings were not there. All the buildings, everything inside the courtyard was built way later, like the second half of the 19th century, mid-19th century. And the Admiralty itself, as you may have figured out, looked very different when it was just built, early 1700s. This is already the building from the Classicism period. That is Catherine the Great. This is the second half of the 18th century. So this is kind of one wing of the Admiralty building. And if you go, I would say if you go past maybe four buildings, you will see the other end, the other wing of the Admiralty. It looks very much identical, absolutely similar. So that this is it. This is the end of the Admiralty. It, I would say, occupied quite a big area, but obviously it was enough for the 18th century, but definitely not enough for the 19th century, especially when they already started to build big metal vessels. So that definitely was not enough. That just wouldn't cut it. And over here, I would say very familiar area, right? The Senate Square with the monument to Peter the Great, the Neva River and the Vasilyevsky Island. And yeah, so that's basically for us to understand where we are and how this area is connected and how it is kind of placed and integrated in the entire city. So maybe I should have done it earlier, but at least now. So well, I would say better late than never. So why not? Yeah, that's the monument, the Bronze Horseman, but it's not actually bronze, but that's how it's called. The name was actually given in one of the poems by Alexander Pushkin. And this is how the name kind of stuck with the monument itself. Bronze Horseman, but that's the monument to Peter the Great and the first public monument in the city built for a monarch during times of Catherine the Great. The St. Isaac's Cathedral, the Gilded Dome, which you can recognize very well, I'm pretty sure. And also the square next to it is called the Senate Square because of the buildings to the right-hand side, the Senate building. And the Senate building looks very similar to the building of the Admiralty because the idea was of the ensembles, right? So starting from the second quarter of the 19th century, thanks to such architects as Carlo Rossi, first of all, this idea of the ensembles, of the cohesion, of the harmony, of different architectural styles in the city, and that especially applied to governmental institutions, to um, official residences. They had to look like they had to be in harmony. They didn't have, they could no longer stand out from I would say, the entire architecture of the city. So it was kind of a unification in a way. So it kind of answers the question why there are so many yellow buildings in St. Petersburg. Or the second answer could be that's because St. Petersburg lacks sunshine. As you know, it's from 80 to 90 sunny days a year. And I guess this is probably kind of an unconscious way of making up for the, I would say, deficiency of sunlight. Oh, yellow color was on sale. Maybe. This story applies to the Soviet time, in fact, when all of a sudden a lot of I would say, originally yellow buildings for some reason, such as the Hermitage, for example, which was scarlet red, became of this turquoise green, interesting, very artificial color. Nobody knows why. I guess because it was on sale. Why the late queen is here? Because the embankment, the English embankment, was named after England. Well, because a lot of English engineers, merchants, politicians and diplomats lived on that embankment. It was one of the most prestigious areas. So the original name of the embankment was the English Embankment. And for the visit of the Queen, the name was returned to the embankment after many other different changes that took place across the 20th century. I would say very stormy 20th century. So, well, this area is kind of a little bit off-beaten. So normally tourists don't really have patience to walk that far. But there are some interesting buildings over there with some stories to share. On the other hand, some buildings actually have some gaps in their story. And that's a good question, why and how. One of the answers could be is that during the Soviet times and maybe even during the contemporary, I would say the modern times, uh, certain organizations were housed there, and those organizations are actually cannot be named. You know, those that can't be named. You know what I'm talking about. And as I said before, unfortunately, I haven't been to many of these buildings. They're just, well, they are either different institutions, different companies, state-run institutions, though, well, those that can't be named institutions, or it's just the offices, you know, head offices of big companies and a couple of hotels. So in fact, this is the business center. Uh, it's just said English Embankment 70. This is the address, and this is the business center. But if you go to the archives, if you go and well try to look through what the story of this building was, there would be a lot of kind of gaps. For 20, 30 years, there's no information at all whatsoever. But from what we know, originally that plot of land, like many of them, was given by Peter the Great to some of his loyal um, well, nobleman from his entourage, but the let's say the Narishkins never really lived in that particular building. They just owned the land, they built a house, and people would be renting from them. That's basically the idea. I have been able to find some photos, quite recent ones. They are from a forum, and this building was put up for sale several years ago, and this is how we found out that something absolutely outrageous happened to this building. They have preserved, after a long restoration, they have preserved the facade, and they indeed restored the facade. Okay, but inside everything is completely new, and it's a business center, a very expensive one. The very common thing, which I totally understand and I totally support, that originally there was an open courtyard. Obviously, no, there was no glass roof, but nowadays this goes without saying that there has to be a roof. So technically speaking, this is a um, kind of a more space, and the building itself was quite narrow, but in fact, the two wings of the building, they go all the way to the street next door, which we also walked. So it may look like a small building, but in fact, that's quite a big one and quite an impressive one in terms of the size. So it's what we know that for a short time in early 20th century and late 19th century, uh, as you already know, the English Embankment had a lot of docks, and there were a lot of piers from where you could go to Peterhof, from where important guests coming from the Kronstadt could be also visiting the city. This is where the ships would be docked and they could get off the ship and everything. So for some time next to this house was docked the famous Aurora cruiser, which gave the sign to start the Storm of the Winter Palace. So this photo is taken in the spring of 1918. And as you know now, the Aurora cruiser is docked on the Neva River, but on the, I would say, way down further down the stream. But this photo was taken very close to the building we were talking about. And again, a lot of gaps, especially in the Soviet period and also in the 2000s. So no idea what was located there, but we kind of have an idea. Okay, the next building, again, another yellow building. Not a classicism, however. That's a little bit different. It's more of eclectic style, a bit of neo-rococo maybe. I would say variations of it. It was built by a representative of one of, I would say, a very prominent St. Petersburg families. That is the Benoit family. You may remember we even visited one of the representatives of the Benoit dynasty in St. Petersburg. It was shortly before my departure from St. Petersburg. It was December, no, it was January 2022. And we spoke about the Benoit family. So Benoit family was architects, artists, engineers, um, writers, poems, uh, people of all these creative walks of life that I would say even shaped maybe the cultural landscape of St. Petersburg and maybe even the entire country in mid 19th century and I would say throughout the 19th century. So Albert Benoit, he was an artist. First of all, he was an artist, but many Benoits were so talented that they could be both artists and architects and designers of all sorts. So that house is the only example of Albert Benoit works, architectural work that we have. All the other buildings either haven't survived or have survived, but with a lot of changes that you can sometimes barely recognize the original building. But as I said, Albert Benoit was an artist first and foremost, and he was even a professor in the Academy of Fine Arts. Without such a title, and also without the diploma of the engineer, he wouldn't have been able to build a building anyway. So he was a really a versatile person, talented in many ways. Um, the by the way, this is not the building we're talking about, but these are his views of St. Petersburg. It's just another building located on another embankment. Albert Benoit created dozens and dozens of watercolor works of the views of St. Petersburg, and they are so detailed that the restorers do often resort to his watercolors when they need to restore a building or they need to see a certain detail. So they can rely on his accuracy in this regard. So this building belonged, as usual, so you can see 1881. This is the very late period. So this is already the eclecticism in full swing. And you can see here features of neo-rococo. You can see a little bit of the Empire style, a little bit of Baroque. So the eclecticism, right? So a mixture of different styles put together. It says, so you may have seen the flag. So it is now it was a hotel when I was in St. Petersburg, and it's still a hotel apparently. I was sure it had closed down. So, but it actually said the House of Molvo. Molvo is the commissioner of the building, and it simply was a residential building of the Molvo family. Before that, there lived about 10 different, they were to get 10 different other owners, but the building that had been standing here before this one was constructed looked quite different, and it was completely redesigned, like absolutely. So the rooms, I would say, maybe it's just because the area is full of all these mansions that belong to former nobility and aristocrats and very rich people. I would say that's why this is a that's a very posh hotel. I found the photos online. I have never been inside, and I've never had tourists also staying in this hotel. So I don't know. But you can see that this there are a lot of elements that have survived to the date. So that's well, the tiles, for example. You know, I'm a huge tile fan. This house is a very unassuming one, and actually it is located exactly at the corner of the English Embankment and the canal. Originally, in the very beginning of St. Petersburg, this plot of land was given to the Demidov family, to Nikita Demidov, who was the basically the founder of the metallurgy industry in the entire country. So he was based in the Urals, right? So in the Ural region, and he was a good friend of Peter the Great. And Peter the Great wanted him to have his place, to have his land in St. Petersburg. So that's why he did. And Nikita even built a house there. It took him about 2 years. He built a house without any, I would say, without any extra decoration, with no opulence, a very, I would say, very modest building, because Nikita Demidov never really wanted to live in St. Petersburg. He knew he had to stay in the Urals, and he managed to take that very new industry to the next level, which probably was the only thing that he did good, because in fact Nikita Demidov was a very brutal man who allegedly, according to the contemporaries, in the fit of anger, killed his own daughter. A lot of historians actually point that out. So I probably would not want to live next door to Nikita Dimitrov. So, but good for me, good for us. He never really lived in this building, but it just belonged to him, and then he would be renting it out. So one of the people who rented from the family was a Scotsman, Sir James Wiley, who was the doctor. Well, that's obviously Nikita Demidov had died long before James Wiley came to St. Petersburg. James Wiley came to St. Petersburg in the early 1800s and stayed for several decades. He was the doctor to Alexander the First, and there was a story. So Alexander the First trusted Sir James Wiley wholeheartedly. He knew he could trust his life to him. And one day, one of the friends of Emperor Alexander the First had something like a little lump in the throat. It's not like he was coughing or choked on something. There was just something, and um, that lump started growing, and so that he already had difficulty breathing. He couldn't talk normally. He couldn't eat normally. So, but nobody wanted to, no other doctors, because obviously Sir James Wiley wasn't the only one. uh, nobody was willing to take the risk because they knew if they had let down the emperor, well, anything could happen to them. So nobody would want to take the risk. But Sir James Wiley happened to be there when that friend started already suffocating. And he was there to cut that lump, and everything was gone, and the patient was safe. So Sir James Wiley stayed in this building. Again, another Scotsman who stayed in St. Petersburg, who worked in St. Petersburg. For some reason, Russian monarchs loved to have doctors somewhere from the UK. It's not the first case. We have already spoken about several other doctors, such as Rogerson and several others. So that's just an interesting story. So Wiley stayed in this building for he rented for quite a while, and he was known uh, to be a very kind man, a very generous man. If someone, let's say, there are many stories about him uh, that basically claim that Wiley, uh, whenever something happened, whenever people felt unwell in the street, he was always there. Whenever somebody needed an urgent care, be it someone, because he wasn't just the doctor of the emperor. He was also there, and sometimes people could just show up next to just basically on his doorway asking for help, and he would never say no. He would always treat you. And when he passed away, in his will, they found out that all the money that Wiley had earned would be, well, he asked them to be donated to several medical facilities. First and foremost, to help the orphans and the challenged families. So that's why next to the building um, of the medical academy was placed a monument to Sir James Wiley. That's an interesting story. So, and another interesting story is that in that very building was born further on, second half of the 19th century, was built a certain Maria Ulyanova. The last name Ulyanova may not mean much to you, but also may mean everything to you, because Ulyanov, well, we know a very prominent Ulyanov family in the Soviet period, in the beginning of the Soviet period. However, back in the 19th century, it was actually a merchant family, even with a little bit of the aristocratic line in it. So this family, the story of this family would be changed, adjusted a little bit in the early Soviet period, because Lenin, who happened to be Vladimir Ulyanov, didn't want the world to know that he was born to uh, to parents of aristocratic descent, and who were basically the representatives of the merchant class. Well, anyway, so Maria Ulyanova, the mother to future Vladimir Lenin, she was born in that house. So her family was renting this house for a while before moving to another town because of the family business. Anyway, so we are now going to look a little bit at that area, which, as I told you before, is this modern shipbuilding yard. There is no access to that territory, so there are well, I don't know anyone who could possibly film for us, and there's not really much that you can film there anyway, but we have some photos. So that area was always used for shipbuilding in this or that way. And as you can see, there is kind of a big barn, big covered shipbuilding place. Also, a lot of what do you call it? Mm, Cranes, right, and all other things which obviously were not accessible when did not exist back in the 18th century, but starting from the second half of the 19th century, when the industry started to change and the ships evolutionized from the wooden ships to the metal ones, things got a lot more complicated, and you could already build a much bigger vessels. You needed more space, so you needed a bigger admiralty, and you already needed something that could lift those big metal pieces. So that's why there were cranes needed and a lot of, I would say, quite advanced technologies. Yep. So, and you can see that building, a very unassuming one, two-floor building in the corner over there. And from here, you can see that famous uh, Annunciation Bridge. And you can see one of the pierces, but you wouldn't see any ships because it's winter. It's because the navigation season is closed. And here you see also the milestone, this wooden one. And technically speaking, for a long time, that was it. There wasn't really much life. There was mostly this kind of industrial area of shipbuilding, a little bit of the port, and that was kind of a little dark end of St. Petersburg for some time. Not anymore. Not anymore for sure. So, mm, okay. I found this photo and I have no idea what this is. It's I don't know. Maybe this was used instead of the ladders that people could go down. Is it a staircase? Is it a ladder? Is it a ladder? I mean, or I I can't figure out. Or maybe those are curtains. I don't know. No idea. And so right now, what you see is that the photo of this building, of the corner, was taken from the other island, right, where the shipbuilding yard is. So, as I said, we cannot film, we cannot walk on that side, but there is something we can see, and there is a story we can share. Actually, the secret lover seascape slide, maybe. I don't know. I have no idea. This photo was just in the archives. So I searched by the address and I found this photo. I couldn't really figure out what was it. Could be no, no, honestly, it doesn't even look like, I would say, very reliable, solid escape slide. I think it's just too thin. Anyway, so it's really hard to believe it, but in fact, over there already begins another island. It's just that the canal is so narrow, it kind of turns to the left there, and you don't see it, but that's already the opposite island. So you can see a little chapel there. So the chapel here is a kind of a remembrance. This is a monument, a memorial to a church, well, to the church that used to stand over there exactly at that edge of the island. It's the Church of the Savior on the waters. Sorry. And this church was built after the Russian-Japanese War. So Russian-Japanese in here 1904, 1905. A lot of Russian officers, a lot of Russian soldiers, sailors died in that war. That was a horrible war that Russia was really ill prepared for. And that started the chain of that very unfortunate event that eventually led even to the revolution and to the great number of failures during the also the First World War. So and to commemorate the those officers and soldiers that perished in the Russo-Japanese War, it was decided to build a church. However, later on, it was agreed that the church would be there to commemorate not only those fallen in the course of the Russo-Japanese War, but basically anyone who perished at sea. The idea belongs to Princess Olga of Greece. I spoke about her in connection with the Russian immigration stories, well, called the Russian Exodus. She, being the queen consort of the Hellenes, and further on, the queen of Hellenes, the queen of Greece, she supported some Russian immigrants that escaped the revolution and, well, found themselves in Greece. It was her idea, so it was Olga's idea to build the church, and the problem was only to get the money, but the funding eventually uh, was found, and the church was built within around 2 or 3 years. This is Queen of Helens herself on her way to the inauguration ceremony. So that's what the church looked like. It was inaugurated several years before the revolution, consecrated to Saint Nicholas, obviously, the wonder worker who was a patron saint of travelers, sailors, whatever. And I couldn't find any, well, good photos of the interiors of the church, but well, what I've been able to find is this kind of illustration of the iconostasis. And well, Saint Nicholas is one of the patron saints of St. Petersburg anyway. So it's only natural to have a lot of St. Nicholas churches in the city. It's probably the fourth one. And it's one of those churches that never really survived the Soviet period because of because of the zero tolerance to any religion in the Soviet Union. This church, like hundreds and hundreds of other churches, was destroyed. And there's just some photos that I found online. We're talking here early 1930s, something like that. And some claim that, by the way, I'm so sorry, and some claim that they even have throughout 60s, 70s, and 50s, people kept finding some elements of the destroyed church. So, and this chapel is it's new. It's I think it was built somewhat in early 2000s, and that chapel was kind of a sign. It was kind of the beginning because there were a lot of talks about the restoration of the Savior on waters, and well, maybe at some point the church would be rebuilt. Technically speaking, there is no much space there anymore on that island because they are building ships. They're not building churches. But, well, nevertheless, remember that a triangular shaped island. So this is the New Holland Island. This is not my photo. I also found it in the open sources. So the big river is the Neva River, where big yacht docked. That's the English Embankment. The bridge over there is the famous Annunciation Bridge, and it connects the Vasilevsky Island with the city island. And that if you look at the right hand side, there is a building with a long red roof. This building also is related to the fleet and the shipbuilding. Right now, this is the Museum of History of the fleet. There are a lot of different items on display from starting from the times of Peter the Great, by the way, because that's where everything started, and also the very first boat of Peter the Great that he made with his own hands is also there on display. So I thought it would be a good idea to walk a little bit in the New Holland Island to kind of wrap up the story of the English embankment that is so connected to the British, to the shipbuilding, to the water, anyway, in this or that way. So I thought it would be quite logical to wrap up in one of the sites that basically determined mm, the way the streets were formed and what they look like. So the new home, this video was filmed, by the way, this summer, 2025. It's now a big recreational area. There is no shipbuilding there anymore. There's no storages, nothing going on, just people relaxing, eating out. There are some offices there. There are some playgrounds. There is a concert venue and restaurants. This is the project that was started in early 2010s, and it's all the private restoration project, which you may remember from my tours, is related to Abramovich, so the famous Russian oligarch. Yeah. Anyway, so up until I would say early 2000s, the New Holland Island, which has always been called like that, was completely inaccessible. During the Soviet period, it underwent incredible neglect, and it fell in disrepair like completely. But it still remained kind of on the balance, still kind of remained the property of the fleet, and because of that, it was not possible to allow any access. But once the area was purchased from the city by Roman Abramovich, the restoration started, and the company that dealt with the restoration also happened to be from the Netherlands. So the Netherlands were restoring the New Holland Island shipbuilding yard or storage yard, and they used, I would say, as much as possible, they tried to use different sustainable technologies. And the idea was to turn it into a green corner of the city, because as you may have seen in the photos, especially those taken by the drone, that there are not enough trees, there are not enough green spaces in the historic downtown. So that was supposed to become kind of a little paradise in the concrete jungles, kind of, in a way. That's, by the way, the yellow bridge. It's one of the symbols of that area. Metal bridge, one of the first ones, by the way, in the city. I mean, metal ones. And that round shaped building, you may remember it from the previous tours. We call it a bottle. That had nothing to do with the shipbuilding or the storage of the construction materials. That was actually a prison for a long time. That was just a general prison for different felonies. Not a political one. The political one was in the Peter and Paul Fortress. We spoke about it a lot, but that was just an ordinary one. And now it's a big business center with a lot of different shops, offices, and on the ground floor, it's just restaurants nonstop. And you can just go around. We call it a bottle, I guess, because of the shape. And a lot of buildings were restored and repurposed, such as this one is now a restaurant. It was a kitchen. So the kitchens were always outside of the main buildings due to conflagration and risks, and also because it was a shipbuilding yard. it was the place where a lot of store a lot of wood was stored. Obviously, they had to follow very strict safety regulations with regards to fire and everything. And by the way, the tar that was absolutely essential in the 18th century when the ships were still built from wood, even tar would not be made here because the tar production needed a lot of fire, and it also was a very smelly industry. So it was decided to place it in the outskirts of the city. So the tar would be delivered to the shipbuilding yards on its own. Right now, we are in the small medicinal herbal garden, and that's the well, we have just been to the gardenia garden. It's kind of very difficult to compare, but this is the area that the kids love a lot because also that ship happens to be a playground for a bigger kid. There is also another playground with a smaller ship, and it's also very green. So all those trees, they didn't grow there. So all those trees were brought, when they were already, I would say, quite a grown-up trees, probably the teenagers, and they were planted there. So it was a big project, a big one. And this is the dock itself. First and foremost, well, those bridges were no there. The ships would be entering through that particular archway, and then as they entered uh, the yard, the well, it was mostly used for just unloading and loading the construction materials, but also smaller vessels could be also uh, fixed there. But it wasn't really the proper shipbuilding yard. So first and foremost, it was designed for the loading and unloading of the construction material. That archway is one of the symbols of the New Holland Island and maybe even the city. It's a very big one. For a long time, it looked absolutely horrible. And they also placed the ugliest uh, kind of a fence next to it. That was horrible, absolutely horrible. It's named the archway is named after the architect, Valin de la Motte. So it's kind of the de la Motte archway. This was restored as well. Obviously, no, well, right now, because there are permanent bridges now thrown absolutely above that kind of canal, so no boats can enter, but it's open to public and you can see what's actually going on the territory of that island and how much fun people are having. Uh, and it was, I would say, the first big scale project in the city when a big industrial zone was completely repurposed into a recreational area, and it indeed became one of the favorite spots for, I would say, in the city. Yep, so I guess this is it. So hopefully next time I will be able to take you on a walk on the English Prospect, English Avenue. But I think it was a nice stroll, a little bit along the embankment, a little bit of stories, a little bit of mysteries. And now that we have seen the entire embankment, I think it's pretty much clear that the city was very international, very much focused on trade and shipbuilding and communication. Well, and just beautiful. That's basically it. So this is it. Thank you so much, the English Embankment. You've been very kind to us. I'm so happy that Misha also got to film big parts of the embankment for us. And speaking of the English Embankment, there's one building that I spoke about last time. Last time we kind of have a lot of palaces. two big palaces that we spoke about. So speaking of one of those buildings, tomorrow I'll be taking to a Romanov Palace, exactly in the English Embankment, the Palace of Mikhail Romanov, the Grand Duke Mikhail Romanov, who was the youngest brother to Nicholas II. So technically speaking, and not even technically so, exactly so, he could have become the next monarch back in March 1917 when Nicholas II abdicated for himself and also in the name of his son. But Mikhail said no. So we're going to talk about it next time. We're going to visit the palace. It's not a splendid one. This palace has never been a museum. In fact, it was an institution. But maybe because of that, there are there's a very interesting vibe there, and the place was not really has not. Yeah, I don't know if it has ever been restored, but it doesn't look like it has ever been restored. So there are a lot of uh, authentic, original uh, elements in the interior because it has never been restored. Anyway, let me know if you have any questions. In the meantime, thank you, Dorothy. Thank you so much. So I will see you in 1 hour from now on two tours back to back. That's going to be the Oldenburg Palace and then the Fabergé Museum, the first episode. Then tomorrow, this artsy New Year market. Then Misha's going to be talking about the Russian literature, especially the story of, well, the Turgenev, the fathers and sons, and a lot of quite fundamental works. Absolutely essential if you want to understand what Dostoevsky was about. You need to talk about Turgenev and some very popular um, movements, literature movements uh, at that period of time. Then Palace of Mikhail Romanov, as promised, and one of the final episodes of the Temple Mount next time. So this Sunday, I mean, we'll be talking about the Pentecost. And also some other important events that happened shortly before the destruction of the temple, and some of the events and characters that are relevant for both Judaism and Christianity. Thank you so much, Cindy. Thank you everyone for joining. You have all the links in case you missed my walk in the Gardenia Garden. The link is also there on the chat. Thank you for your interest in my tours. Thank you so much for finding time to join my tours, and happy holidays. I will see you soon in 1 hour from now. Bye bye.